Now, before we turn to what is on the horizon for 2022, I know what we get emails about all the time are what work are we doing, what work have we done related to the COVID pandemic and government overreach during the pandemic. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the cases that we brought in the last year that related to government overreach related to COVID?
So I'll just tick through them really quickly because we have a bunch. The first is that we challenged the federal government's hotel quarantine measures, and we did successfully obtain a compassionate exemption for people leaving Canada for medical treatment or for compassionate reasons, which wasn't there initially.
Compassionate reasons would be, for example, if you needed to leave to attend a funeral in another country or attend someone's medical care. An exemption that actually existed if you needed to enter Canada for one of those reasons, but for some reason you couldn't leave Canada for those reasons without needing to quarantine in these hotels.
Correct. So the other case we were involved in was we intervened in a challenge on behalf of Toronto International Celebration Church, which is a church that was a huge facility and was very conscientious about physical distancing and everything like that, but would have had to limit their services severely under the Ontario stay-at-home measure. And we just recognized that freedom of religion is a fundamental freedom, and we intervened to make that point. Once the stay-at-home order was lifted, that was abandoned. Another case that I thought was really effective was we represented a lone protester who's protesting the lockdown measures. He was a small business owner protesting the measures outside of Kingston City Hall by himself, masked, was still ticketed by the police. And so we took his case and we successfully had the Crown withdraw all of the charges at an early stage. And then there was some great advocacy that you, Christine, did, I have to say, in Manitoba, in terms of Manitoba had a vaccine passport policy with no medical exemptions. And you worked with an individual in the province and heard about her case and wrote about her case. She had received a first dose of the Pfizer vaccine and had developed some pretty severe symptoms. And she was just an example of the rare but serious medical cases that can come up. And Manitoba successfully did create a process for medical exemptions just from that letter.
And that woman, by the way, does have a medical exemption now to the proof of vaccine policy. So she's had a good result.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we'll talk a bit later about other provinces and what they're doing on that same issue. And then finally, of course, I think for me personally, when I think about like the psychological natter of the whole pandemic, it was April 2021 in Ontario when Doug Ford announced new stay-at-home measures, closing playgrounds, and most disturbingly, new police powers that the police could basically stop you and ask you why you were outside of your home. And so we were immediate and vocally in opposition to that. And of course, we weren't the only ones, and those were walked back within about 24 hours.
Yeah, I think that was probably for me the low point of the pandemic, when I was told I wasn't allowed to go to a playground with my young son. It was really distressing, and I think a lot of civil liberties organizations pushed back against that. And I'm pleased that there was the result, but I'm distraught when I read in the newspaper that the Attorney General had actually raised the unconstitutionality of that proposal at Cabinet. It's very disturbing trends that we're seeing across the country about politicians just totally ignoring the content of our Constitution and ignoring their responsibility to protect our fundamental rights. Just underscores how important it is for organizations like the Canadian Constitution Foundation to exist and do the work that we do. Now, one thing I wanted to mention before we have this next break, we have about a minute, is on the horizon, we have a case involving freedom of expression and a woman in Ontario who had put up a flag in front of her house. What can you tell us briefly about that case?
So it's a working mom who has a sign that has an obscenity, F Trudeau. Hopefully we can say that. And the town of Port Colborne, where she lives, requested she take down the sign, not on an obscenity basis. You're allowed to have obscene political criticism, but on the basis that it interfered with zoning laws and sight lines and things like that. And we just said, absolutely not. It's her right to express her opinion about the Prime Minister. It's her property, and she has a right to fly that flag. And so we we will be appealing the town's decision.
So I think that issue is worthy of a whole episode. It was a flag she put outside, and you have a right to criticize the government using whatever words you choose. I might not choose to use those words, but certainly our politicians right now, very worthy of criticism.